The Resurrection of the Body in Dante's Divine Comedy. The following paper is intended to provide a series of thoughts and meditations upon the way in which the reality and concept of the resurrection of the body is present in Dante's Divine Comedy. In no way could the scope of this paper include all references to the resurrection as they are found in Dante's work. The small piece of writing has its purposeful and necessary limitations. In the course of this exploration, I will in turn bring up a provocation that presents a certain challenge to the manner in which Dante depicts the human person in relation to the resurrection and the sufferings of the damned. Such an instigation is intended to provoke further thought about the phenomenal narrative that is the Divine Comedy, and to hopefully foster a greater and deeper understanding of the great act of the resurrection. We will start off by focusing on the type of embodiment that we meet in the comedy, that of the aerial body. By considering this temporary expression of the human person, we gain greater insight into Dante's understanding of the general resurrection. One of the more fascinating aspects of the Divine Comedy is one of its most basic, that is, the nature of those personages we meet along our poetic pilgrimage. Just what or who is it that we are dealing with as we journey along, and, just as importantly, just how is it that we are dealing with them? Here we have the still living and fully embodied Dante making his way through hell, purgatory, and paradise, which are inhabited with, well, what exactly are they inhabited with? Souls? Yes, but not the entirely immaterial and visible variety. They are embodied in a real, but different way. There is a ghostly realism to them. This is not earthly embodiment, not the normal fare, also not what will be in the end, after the trumpet blasts, tombs burst forth, and the restoration occurs. And it is not as if Dante turns his eye, or pen, away from this challenging aspect of his imaginative exercise. Far from it. On numerous occasions our poet unfolds for us a reasoned explanation of what appears at first to be a conceptual conundrum. If we look to Purgatorio 25, we get an explicit treatment from the poet Statius on just what it is we are seeing and interacting with when it comes to the human person post-death, and therefore post-body, yet pre-resurrection, or pre-re-embodied, so to speak. Upon the request of Virgil, Statius sets out to explain to Dante the nature of the aerial body as we meet it in hell and purgatory. In order to do so, he begins with a look at an embryological and generative account of the formation of the human person in the womb. After the in utero quickening, Statius explains that the active force has now become a soul like that of a plant. This then gives way when, through the process, the sensitive soul takes charge. It then begins to form those powers of sense, Statius says, with a form of the body then taking hold so that, quote, every member takes form and place, end quote. Statius then pauses, adding gravity to the next step in the process, whereupon the perfection in the fetal brain, Statius says, being established, God at that instant, quote, rejoicing at such art in nature, breathes into it a new and powerful spirit, forming a single soul. As a note of aside, implicit in this narrative is a background that runs into the past, specifically the 13th century debate over the substantial form or forms of the human person, including the controversy of whether or not the bodily form remains substantially, yet subserviently, coexistent with the substantial form of the intellective soul. While the scope of this paper does not include the breadth to explore the implications of this controversy on the narrative Dante puts before us, it will be a worthy and thought-provoking exercise in another venue. Getting back to Statius's narrative, of course in time the person dies, with the soul moving onward, taking, quote, with it the essence of its divine and human faculties, its lower powers grown passive, but memory, intelligence, and will more active than they were, and more acute, end quote. But it still remains to be seen how it is that such an immaterial soul can be visible. Statius continues explaining that once in its new environment, the formative power of the rational soul rays out, as it did first in shaping the bodily parts it left back there. The air about it takes on that soul's image. From air it draws visibility, hence it is called a shade. And out of air it forms the organs of sight, speech, and every sense." End quote. It is this shade existence that provides so much drama and pathos, so much exploration of the reality of the resurrection, and for persons longing for reunion with body. So much so that we see our shades forget at times their lack of body, or illustrate concern for their earthly body as it remains in the ground in their tomb. And they even marvel at the body that Dante still possesses. We see throughout the narrative, and in Statius's explanation, that, quote, "self in the Divine Comedy has thus nothing to do with survival in material particles. Identity and integrity are, in a fully Thomistic sense, packed into and guaranteed by soul." That quote coming from Carolyn Walker Bynum. Here comes something of a rub, though. Even though identity is guaranteed by soul, it never is enough for the shades. Soul alone does not suffice. The saved in purgatory and the blessed in paradise long and yearn for body, and even the damned will resume their embodiment. So we see in the comedy, quote, Dante providing an elaborate comment on embodiment, making it clear that aerial body is temporary, that aerial body is not real body, that is, the physical body of earth and resurrection, and that, quote, real body is good, end quote. And further, from another commenter, quote, the soul's somatomorphism in the comedy allows for the full experience before the resurrection, but never replaces the traditional emphasis on the resurrection of the body as the necessary reconstitution of the person in his or her material wholeness, end quote. This strikes me as indicative of Dante not being wholly without conflict in his Thomistic understanding of the substantial form of the human person. But again, this is for another time. Let us now spend some time with the damned. In Canto 6 of the Inferno, the topic and reality of the resurrection of the body arises. Our poets are amongst the gluttonous at this point, and just prior to the end of the canto, Virgil states, "He will not wake again until the angel trumpet sounds the day on which the host shall come to judge all men. Then shall each soul before the seat of mercy return to its sad grave and flesh and form to hear the edict of eternity." Upon being confronted with the idea of the resurrection, Dante responds by asking a question regarding the punishments the gluttonous will experience once this re-embodiment has taken place. Will the pains abate, increase, or remain the same? Virgil's response is certainly interesting. He says, "Look to your science again," that is, to Aristotle. Quote, "The more a thing is perfect, the more it feels of pleasure and pain." End quote. This is a fascinating turn and leads to lines expressive of Thomistic thought. The person is more perfect when body and soul are united, and the soul in perdition will actually become more perfect when united to the body, even though the person's eternal place of residence and torment remains the same. As Virgil further explains, "As for these souls, though they can never soar to true perfection, still in the new time they will be nearer it than they were before." End quote. Following the lights of this canto, though, the resurrected person will, due to his greater perfection, feel more pain than when he just maintained his ghost. Such lines of thought provide for a deeper understanding of the dark irony at work amongst the damned. It appears, certainly, that the restoration of bodily integrity is a mercy and gift given to the damned. Yet at the very same time, this gift, following Dante and Thomas and Aristotelian light, facilitates a greater experience of woe. Continuing along these lines, whereas the resurrected body should have ushered the person into further glory and joy and ecstasy, now, in their damnation, the effective result of their being reclothed is that they experience greater suffering. One can further conclude that not only does re-embodiment provide for further suffering as regards the individual, but that a further haunting reality that will linger about the person for eternity will be the very fact that the possession of the resurrected body is the ultimate sign of Christ's victory. The suffering of the damned will be further compounded in that this great sign of victory, their resurrected body, is in fact further cause for their torment. What should have been their glory is now their anguish, and this great sign of victory is now embroiled in their drastic failure to partake in it.